Wow, this is such an honor for me to be on the stage with these fantastic thought leaders in this space. So thank you, ladies, for joining me. In writing and sharing comes healing. How do we communicate the experience of illness in the digital age? Some of you might be familiar with the quote from Susan Sontag, who wrote, "Everyone who is born holds dual citizenship in the kingdom of the well and the kingdom of the sick. Although we prefer to use the good passport, sooner or later, each of us is obliged, at least for a spell, to identify ourselves as citizens of that other place." So, our panel will explore bridging the abyss of isolation, of fear, of disconnect that often separates those with chronic illness by examining how we experience and communicate this experience of living with illness. I'm Pam Ressler. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you guys moved over. Make this a little cozier here.
It's
good.
Because of the
okay.
shoes.
Yes, color-coordinated shoes here. I'm Pam Ressler. I'm a nurse researcher and faculty member in the Pain Research Education and Policy program at Tufts University School of Medicine in Boston. And I'm also the founder of a company called Stress Resources, where I work with individuals and organizations to build resilience. To my right is my lovely colleague and friend, Susannah Fox, who most of you know. Susannah writes she's an internet geologist, a healthcare gadfly, and a community colleague. She's currently the entrepreneur in residence at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Next, my also lovely colleague is Meredith Gould. And Meredith is a sociologist by training, a digital strategist, and a 9-time author. She's keen on using social media to build community, empower patients, and deepen faith. She's also the community manager of the Social Media Health Network for the Mayo Clinic Center for Social Media. And last but not least, from across the border is another lovely colleague, Colleen Young. Colleen is an online community builder and strategist. She's the founder of Healthcare Social Media Canada, which many of you here and also online follow regularly. She's a community manager for virtual hospice and manager of patient engagement and social innovation at ELLICSR Princess Margaret Cancer Center in Toronto. So, we got a lot of thought leaders up here, and we have a lot of thought leaders out there. And so what I'd like to do as a moderator is to throw some questions off to our panel. We will leave time for us to chat with those of you in the audience. But let's start with Susannah. And what do we know about the history of online patient communities and connection?
Well, one thing that we've learned is that the internet has democratized publishing. It's democratized the spread of information. And it turns out that we're about 15 years into this, and some people are still not used to it. They're still not ready for it. And what we've seen in the research that we've done at the Pew Research Center is that the real power, the secret truth that we all know is that the internet is not just giving us access to information, but it gives us access to each other. And that turns out to be the most important thing in healthcare and online for any reason. Now, in 1999, Tom Ferguson actually did a survey of an online patient community asking people, what is the community that you're part of good for? Are they good for diagnosis, treatment? Are they good for getting information about a specialist? Versus the community versus doctors and health professionals. And what we did in 2010 was repeat that in a national survey. So we went from 1999, when about 40% of American adults had access to the internet, sort of the dinosaurs roaming the internet era, to 2010, when we were closer to 75, 80%. And the results were the same, that people say that doctors and health professionals are good for some things, and community and peers are good for other things. And I think that what we need to do is, to quote Dana Lewis, we are not waiting. We are not waiting for everyone to understand the power of this. We need to go forward. Where we are now is at about 1 in 5 internet users has looked online for someone like them, someone who shares their same health condition. It's 1 in 4 internet users who have a chronic condition. My question for everyone here is, how might we spread that? How might we spread the word of the power of connecting online?
Thank you. And that's really helpful to kind of have that longitudinal view of where we were, where we are now, and perhaps think about where we're going in the future. So Meredith, how has digital technology shaped the realities of online disclosure?
Well, it's a great, that's the kind of question that makes sociologists and other social scientists so happy. There are a couple realities about how digital, I say that digital has absolutely transformed, not just changed, but transformed the way we engage. It has changed the culture, and that is true whether or not someone's online. So the influence of online engagement, the expectations people have about the speed with which information happens, expectations about the reach of information, that has changed in the culture generally, and I would say that that's because of the influence of digital. Now, as a result, what's happened is that speed and that reach has led to depth. So when it comes to self-disclosure, we find a lot of, especially whether it's in an online community or not on an online community, although it's almost incomprehensible that you don't have community the moment you're online. Some of that disclosure may be intentional, but a lot of it is unintended because of the public nature of the internet and the public nature of digital. So the other point I think is really important to remember is that there is no such thing as privacy. And we keep having this privacy conversation in health and healthcare, and we keep having this protection. I spend most of my time, those of you who follow me on Twitter know that in addition to correcting people's spelling of HIPAA, I spend a lot of time telling people that the P does not stand for privacy, it stands for portability. Yeah. So we've gotten pulled into this conversation about privacy that it's a non-conversation, but we keep still having it. So that's I think the key things that ways that digital has really transformed the way we engage online and the culture in general.
Yeah, I think that's really important to understand that being online doesn't guarantee privacy at all, and that we are in a different space.
Right, and when we loop back after. She's amazing. After we loop back, I would love to talk a little bit more and maybe have other people talk about the distinction between privacy and secrecy. Yeah. Because that gets confused a lot. Yeah.
So Colleen, what role do you think self-disclosure plays in building and sustaining online communities? And you as a community manager can probably speak to this really well. How do community managers harness that?
Well, for online communities and the people who drive them, self-disclosure is actually gold. It's the currency. It's the currency that distinguishes them from communities that are useful and valuable to communities who, basically are just gatherings or ghost towns, which there's plenty of communities out there, community platforms that have been built, and there's absolutely no activity on them. And it's through self-disclosure that we get that activity. Community managers seek out self-disclosure. We initiate it. We encourage it when we see it burgeoning. We actually make sure that when somebody self-discloses that they're not left out there vulnerably, that somebody responds and responds quickly. Because it's shown that if somebody gives some personal information or shares an experience, thought, or opinion, then if that gets reciprocated, then self-disclosure continues. And as people reveal a little bit more about themselves, then this is the connections that are created. They build strength, and then they deepen relationships. And I think since day one of the conference today, we've really been focusing on relationships, and that is what community is. It's building relationships. This then makes a deeper sense of community, and sense of community is really that special sauce that distinguishes communities that work. So we often use metrics of growth and activity because they're easily quantifiable to measure the success of online communities, but it's really the sense of community that is the thing that distinguishes it and makes it into that gold.
Can I just
Yeah,
jump in?
please.
You know, what you said about the community, one great thing about this panel is that we've spent the past few months just really having this conversation with one another and online and on our blogs, and we'll talk about flipping the panel maybe. So this is like what happens when we get together. When you said the community, one of the things that we were talking about the other day is also, and again, this is a sociological principle, a group is not automatically a community.
No.
That there is a process that needs to happen. And what you're telling us is that the self-disclosure is part of the process that moves a group into, or transforms a group into community.
Absolutely.
I would also add, because we're talking about technology, that technology is also a piece of it. The ghost town communities, and I jump on almost all communities at the beginning as in beta, sometimes I see that they're going to become ghost towns not because people aren't disclosing, but because the technology is awful. Their functionality is off. Their navigation is off. They've picked fonts that every human being knows, or should, is web unreadable. So there are a lot of factors that factor into online engagement.
Yeah, I think we do have to realize that this is complex. It's not shifting one piece. It's really a system, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts, Susannah, to share?
Well, I was thinking about how when we were talking about through the process of flipping the panel, and in case you haven't looked at it, we created a Storify which links to all the background material that we all collected over the last few months, that we actually became a community.
Yes.
And that really has changed us.
Yeah.
And we knew each other, but that experience has really has changed us as professionals and personally. And I think that's important to acknowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah, this idea of flipping the panel, actually, Susannah came up with it, and it was really fabulous. And what we tried to do is to meet virtually with each other a couple of times and just talked about where we thought the key points of our topic really led us. And then we threw it out there to all of you to give us feedback. We learned, we listened, and it changed us. And I think that was really powerful because we came into the panel after it was accepted with kind of an agenda, I must say, of what we felt we wanted to put out there. And by listening and by learning and by sharing, I think it changed us and it changed the focus of where we are today. And that really is community, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And the parallel that I see is that it's inspired by sort of flip teaching, the Khan Academy model, and also the idea of flipping the clinic, that you do a
That's
lot
right.
of your homework before you get to see your 15 minutes with your doctor. If you don't mind, I'm going to skip ahead to the part where we
Please.
talk about
I was
what's
just
changed.
getting to that part, and
Thank you.
actually, I'm going to ask each of our panelists.
We're a well-oiled machine.
What drew you to participating in this work and in this panel too? So let's start with you, Susannah, since it seems like you have something to jump in with right now.
Well, So what drew me initially to the work that I did at the Pew Research Center was having Tom Ferguson as my mentor, and he was the one who introduced me to the idea of surveying and spending time doing fieldwork in online patient communities. And I was so deeply moved by what I saw there that I knew that this was going to be my life's work. And but what happened in my personal life is that I have a son who has life-threatening food allergies. And I've actually never talked about that in public. This is the first time on this stage where I'm disclosing that. And the strength and courage that I have to talk about that publicly comes from the women that I'm sharing the stage with, and comes from the Medicine X community, and comes from the work that we have all done together to show what is the power of connecting with peers online. I've been part of an online community of other food allergy parents for about 6 years. And frankly, what we do is we flip the clinic, and we've been doing it for 6 years. So when I go to see our allergist, we get the test done, we meet for 15 minutes, it's valuable. But all the work, all the daily work of protecting my son from allergens happens at home. And it happens because I have the support 24/7 of these other moms. And you know what? I calculated this yesterday. I was thinking about it. When I go in to see my allergist, and we haven't seen them in a year, there's no acknowledgement of the awesome job I did in not having a food allergy incident. I prevented, and through my training, his teachers, everyone in his life prevented, I calculated, we prevented 1,500 adverse events.
Wow.
That's 3 meals and a snack a day for a whole year. And what I want to do is say, it is so brave of people to share online and help me to become a better caregiver. And we don't acknowledge that. We don't acknowledge the public service and the gift that can never be repaid of people who share online.
Yeah, true.
You are very brave. Thank you for sharing that, too, with us. Meredith, how about you? What drew you to this work, this panel?
I say that people get drawn to sociology. I also say I have an advanced degree in minding everyone else's business, putting people in categories and judging them. And so I'm fascinated by community. I'm fascinated by how groups become community. And then in terms of this panel, I do not talk about my chronic illness a lot. And we were talking before that, in fact, Christine Kraft, who some of you may know, and I met her through social media. I met her through a health camp. She was the one who said to me, I want you to write about what it feels like to have fibromyalgia. I said, no, I don't write about that. You know, it's what Britt was saying the other day. No, I don't want to talk about my pain level. I don't want to talk about it. I want to have my life, and thank you, I want to be in denial. And she said to me, no, you need to write about this because there are other people. I was like, oh, there are other people. Now, I've always worked in service. I've always been, before the internet, because there was a world before the internet, I was a community organizer, and I'm also very active in faith communities. So I should know this. But I didn't act as if I knew it. Yeah. So I noticed that for myself in the process of working with all you and hanging out with all you, and that I became braver. That about, no, I can talk about this. Now, I will say that I'm still very circumspect about this. And that is part of just my own self-preservation system. Again, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll occasionally see me put up the hashtag fibro or the hashtag spoonie. And it's usually because I want a reality check if everybody else is in excruciating agony because the barometric pressure is dropping. But I don't do that. That's not my primary identity online. I do use the other thing that I became very conscious of as we were working on this panel is the importance of the back channel. And when to go to the back channel, what's public, what's private. So I will tell you, on stage for the first time, a great story about how, if you know Melissa, Dr. Snit, I sent her a direct message last year saying, oh my God, I just saw a textbook butterfly rash. Textbook. And I have been testing borderline for lupus. And I said, and I went to her because her blog is living with lupus, dying of everything else. And she's also a sociologist, and she's a friend. I went back channel. I said, holy. Melissa, again, if you know Melissa, direct message, stop being an asshole and go get a blood test. Went to my doctor, said, you need to test this, and here's why. Mm-hmm. What happened after that is another great adventure. But that was online community, and that was also the support in being online for so long. Knowing the right person who knew me and who was engaged with me over the years, who had my permission and my invitation to say, stop being an asshole, go get a blood test. Loved her for it, love her for it.
I think what that speaks to is how we started, and as we've said, has been really the theme that's coming through for me for this conference, and that's relationships matter.
That's right. Yeah.
Relationships matter. Whether it's online, whether it's sitting here on this stage, relationships are where it's at, right? Mm-hmm. Colleen, same question. What drew you to this work? What drew you to this panel?
So I think I have my evidence what draws one to this work right here. Communities matter, peer sharing matters, and it's powerful, it's valuable, and it needs to be more valued by the medical community. Yes. It needs to be prescribed by the medical community. We need to prescribe our communities back to the medical community. Yeah. So that we can vet them, we know which ones are useful, and they can't be surveying all of them all of the time. We know that things move really fast. What might be really good now might not be so good later. So let's keep monitoring. Let's reverse prescribe back to the medical community, the communities that work, because we know that they do. We know that there's behavioral change that happens. We know that there's growth that happens through the peer sharing. And we know that technology has enabled this online. But technology doesn't make a community. Mm-hmm. People make a community. Mm-hmm. And what I really, really want to underline is that behind each and every community is a person or a team of people that are making these connections, that build the trust, that make the relationships. It's not enough just to build a house and expect people to populate it. It just doesn't happen that way. And you shouldn't have this huge launch either and just get a gazillion people registering to your online community, because then you have a dead settlement. So you essentially have a whole gathering of people like mayflies that came there one day and are lying scattered on the floor, basically dead. And that's not going to help anything. So what you need to do is to invite a few people. Sorry, should I go?
No, I love it. It's a very moving visual. I want to go like this.
Do you have mayflies in America as well?
Yes. Well, yeah. Fruit flies.
Fruit flies.
We translate.
Yeah. Okay. So we have what you have to do is just invite a few people in at a time. And, of course, bring them into the kitchen, because that's where everybody wants to go, right? You have something in common to talk about, because I want to emphasize that self-disclosure is not full disclosure.
Yes.
I would not presume to come into this room and say, could everybody please stand up and take off all your clothes?
Oh, please don't.
Because that would... I'm quite convinced that would make you feel uncomfortable, and probably the person beside you as well. And if I did that, you'd realize how hard my spandex is working right now. So what you want to do is bring in a few people at a time, bring them into the kitchen, and you'll have that hostess with the mostest that's watching these conversations. And you'll see that some of them stay superficial, and that's okay. That's just fine. But what you want to observe, it's those ones who have made a particular connection. Or you've introduced and introduced yourself to some of the people, found out something really special about them, but then you know that Fred over here is really interested in that as well. So you bring Fred and Sue together to talk about that. You introduce maybe a few other people to that conversation. You'll notice that that one in the kitchen is maybe needing to go into another room. So you usher them into another room. And that's where you make maybe another chamber in your forum for them to talk about, and keep bringing people. So there's an awful lot that community managers do in the background. Then you have a new member coming in, and this person has shared something incredibly vulnerable. You want to make sure that that answer, or that question, that story sharing doesn't just hang out there. Nothing puts a dagger into our hearts than when a vulnerable disclosure goes unanswered. And so these are the what I know to be the value of online communities and the community managers who drive them.
I think that's so powerful. It sounds like you're saying that this is really inviting radical hospitality.
Yes.
Isn't it?
It's radical
Yeah.
hospitality.
And that's what we're inviting. Wow. Well,
And
I don't know
Hixom,
about you guys.
Canada came out of Hixom.
Oh,
That
absolutely.
emerged from that. And when I started Chisaka, the church social media chat, I went to you, and then I went to Christian Sinclair, who had started HPM, which is the Hospice and Palliative Medicine chat. And I went to those community managers and said, I think I should probably know this, but help me understand how to build community online. How do you do that? And both you and Christian gave me that coaching about titrate it in. Don't, let it emerge. Discover who the participants are. Encourage them. So I learned, I think all those of us who are online community managers are available to other people who want to start online communities. And very generous. I mean,
Yeah.
you were very generous with me.
I want to make sure that we leave enough time to go to our audience, just because
Get up
I'm
and go
sure
to the
you-
microphones. We want to hear from you guys.
Please get up. I'll kind of frame how we may not have time to take everyone's question, because I want to leave a few moments for closing thoughts from our panelists. But I invite you, let me throw out a prompt for you. Frame your question to us in design mode, meaning how might we spread the word about online connection, about this radical hospitality.
So while Carly thinks about how she's going to frame her question, I'm going to say my question. How might we make this look less like witchcraft? Because that's what people outside our community sometimes think of us. And that's what that's the prompt for this panel, which was this international controversy that happened. And if you don't know about it, you can look at our Storify. But essentially it said, we can't allow people to connect online, which is anathema to all of us.
So please.
Okay, so I can frame that in that prompt, but let me do a small intro to my comment. I was a little bit confused, I guess, about what the conversation, how it would go. And I thought that it would be focusing a little bit more on the individual patient telling her story and getting a lot of negative feedback for that. And given that it can be so difficult to, be brave enough to tell your story in the first place, how might we better encourage and support patients or caregivers out in that, in the scary internet world, to be more comfortable with whatever level of disclosure they personally wish to, and make it, as safe and a welcoming place for them. Because I feel like as human beings, we own our story, and it's our right to decide if we want to tell it, and that no one should then stand up and tell us, no, stop saying that, because reading your story is making me feel a certain way that I'm uncomfortable with.
If you know, I thank you so much.
Yes.
So the process that we all went through as we prepared for this panel, we were inspired by what happened with, and the story is about Lisa Adams, who's an amazing writer who writes about all kinds of wonderful things, including the fact that she has metastatic breast cancer. And she was attacked in the press by a Guardian columnist and a New York Times columnist. And what I would say is that to answer the how might we is that what I loved is that what I don't think anybody in the mainstream world expected was the online world's response. It was like immediate, strong. I felt like, you know, sometimes I think like they're the muggles and we're the wizards. And it was like Gryffindor came out around Lisa. You know, it was like we brought out the dragons. Like we just weren't going to play around. How dare you? How dare you attack our friend? How dare you tell a woman not to talk about what she's going through? How dare you say she's dying in a national newspaper when a year later she's still here?
Yeah.
Well, and it goes to, you know, you're asking how might we create safety? And I think what Colleen was pointing out, just in terms of the practicalities of online management, that a good community manager pays attention to what's going on. A community, and as I said earlier, you know, that shift from group to community, you know you have a community when the community emerges to take care of the issue or problem. As a community manager, and I've managed a couple of online communities, with one of the chats I manage, during the chat, when I'm the moderator, I often get this, early on, I would get this string of direct messages. Make her stop, make him do this, he's a jerk, what a troll. I mean, direct messages as I'm moderating. My response, handle it yourself, let the community emerge. I am not the mother superior, much as I would love to be. You know, so it's like, and I backed off because, and when I say to people, whatever, we gotta stop, we don't, but those people who think it's witchcraft, there is no distinction between so-called in real life and online life. Whatever happens in real life happens online, only faster and with a broader reach. So bullies, people who bully, taunt, and shame people about their illness in so-called real life will do it online.
That's right.
People who are piss-poor listeners in real life will be that online. So I think, again, having to do with community and how we understand community and how we manage community, once we get and help, how might we, the answer is, my question is, how might we help people who are not digitally savvy and maybe even a little technophobic and have demonized the internet and demonized social media? How might we persuade them, inspire them to understand that basically what we have online is access to many, many more connections and possible relationships than we could ever hope to have in the flesh? How might we do that?
Yeah. In the back, thank you.
An observation and comment. One of the how might we's actually is by sitting on the stage telling your stories. And so first of all, thank you for doing that, because it makes it possible, I think, for more and more of us to do that. I also want to observe that, at least for me, I tend not to share my health story publicly or my caregiver story publicly, in part because I fear that if I do, if I'm identified primarily as patient, I will lose professional credibility. Yes. And I think it's at gatherings like this that where we really start acknowledging patients, taking them seriously, that we start to change that dynamic. But if we're really going to move forward, we have to, I think, be able to acknowledge and change the culture in ways that suggest that patients are also professionals, and that you can have an identity that is part patient and also a lot of other things in the universe. And so I just want to celebrate what you're doing here.
Thank you.
I would also say, in terms of the fibromyalgia and other autoimmune diseases, and I talk to people with that, I consciously decided not to talk about it because I needed to stay employed. And I needed the health insurance.
And I think that's a really key
There
point.
was no way I was going to talk
Yeah.
about it.
I'll
Joe.
encourage you
Oh,
to,
oh,
in the
please,
Storify,
Colleen,
just
yes.
to read, to advertise my post, but it's not my post. I scroll down to the comments from Paul
Comments
Wicks.
are amazing.
All the comments, there's
Yeah.
like 38 comments on it, and Paul Wicks talks about how it's not a technological problem, it's still a social problem
Yes.
if we're not able to disclose. And so
Yeah.
when can it be that we can talk about a gastrointestinal
That's right.
problem publicly?
And
Yeah.
I think that's really powerful. Last question.
Oh, we've got
Joe,
two,
please.
actually.
Oh, we have
Yeah.
two. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Last two questions. Joe, please.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to bring to your attention another issue with respect to getting people to accept an online community. I'm a 50-something-year-old guy with kids who have demonized the internet, from my viewpoint, at my house. My wife's a teacher, and the internet demonizes itself with respect to distractions in her classroom. And so it had not become part of my community until my presentation here this weekend. I became a new tweeter. and
Bravo.
Hello, my
fish
name
are
is-
friends, not food. But so I will go home with this newly found community that I have admired through my partner, who's a big Dr. Brian Stork, who a lot of you know. And I'm amazed at his community of people that he has never met in person, that he can walk up and hug. I have not viewed the internet as a huggable situation. And so I will go home with this newly found, newly found community, and my wife won't understand.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And welcome.
That's a new version of my wife doesn't understand me. I don't think I've ever heard that one before.
So last question here, and then I'd like to invite our panelists after the last question to give, as we sometimes do in tweet chats, a CT, a closing thought. So please.
Thank you for letting me tag on. So I just want to go back to a quick point around privacy, which you raised, and Colleen, you spoke further when you said self-disclosure is not full disclosure. And to frame it into how might we, it's how might we actually reframe the opposite of privacy to not being secrecy, that the opposite of privacy is really vulnerability. And I think from all perspectives, either if you're a patient coming online, how much you're disclosing, and I don't think you'll see it as a secret as much as being able to control, and it's like be the locus of control of how your information is distributed and how you choose to do that. And from maybe a professional perspective, the vulnerability they feel in terms of exposing their practice or the way they practice. So I just, I think that's a question that I walk away with, and I think it's a larger discussion for this panel for MedX in terms of how do we reframe what the opposite of privacy is and what privacy really means.
I think we'll have to leave that hang out there.
That's
but
great.
What I'm going, and it's fabulous.
Thanks, Jody.
I think what I would encourage and invite you to do is this conversation doesn't end when we walk from the stage. We are a community. And we flipped the panel for you. The panel will continue, not in this way, but in this way. And everyone who's out there listening to us and tweeting about this right now. And so this conversation does not end here. So with that, quick closing remark by each of our panelists. And I'm going to start with Colleen this time, since she's way at the end. So please go, Colleen.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that communities that enable and create those safe, welcoming places to allow self-disclosure are the ones that we value the most, and that are the ones that I think are going to get the attention of the medical world. And I think are the ones that, if I'm going to steal Susannah Fox's words, are really the innovation that has radically changed our connected health world.
Thank you, Colleen. Meredith, closing thought, Twitter speak.
I see in online community the call to greater tolerance, more generosity, and deeper compassion, and the opportunity for people to understand that they're not isolated, and we're called to be a greater self and a greater self in relation to others. And so my hope and my prayer for online communities is that as people disclose, we who witness it are called into greater tolerance, more compassion, and deeper generosity.
Thank you. And Susannah, please, closing thought.
We've mostly talked about the positives. If you look at the Storify and if you look at the comments, there have been some negatives that people talk about, and I just want to quickly say that's important to explore. I'd love to explore that more in the after party. And what I would say is, how might we thank the public servants who are patient bloggers and caregiver bloggers and people who are part of online communities and people who put that information out there so that we can all be better for it? How might we thank them?
That's a good question.
Yeah, so I'd just like to close with the words that you saw projected when we came out, and we started with, "In writing and sharing comes healing." That quote actually came from somebody responding to our flip panel. Perhaps, like us, you've been inspired to look broadly and deeply at how this digital age has shifted our ability to connect and to communicate and to share. And I guess if I were to put it out there with how might we, as Dan Siegel invited us in his keynote on Friday, how might we continue to shift from me to we? Thank you.